I knew something was wrong the second I pulled into my driveway and saw the dust cloud hanging in the air like a bad omen. My boots crunched against gravel that hadn't been there yesterday. And then my heart dropped. They dumped it straight on my rose bed. Not beside it. Not near it. Right on top of it. My name's Isaac Steller. I'm a paramedic, which means I've seen a lot of blood, bad decisions, and broken people. But somehow, nothing prepared me for the sight of my crushed roses, 20 years of pruning, grafting, and care buried under 2 tons of gray speckled gravel like a construction site. I stood there, fists clenched, staring at the spot where my prize-winning garnet beauty climbers used to wrap around the iron archway.
Gone.
Smothered.
Dead.
I didn't need to ask who did it. Orielle Abner, I muttered. The HOA president. Middle-aged, perpetually annoyed, and always lurking around in her beige SUV, like a hawk with a clipboard. She'd had it out for me ever since I installed a dark walnut mailbox that clashed with a uniform suburban aesthetic. Her words, not mine. I wasn't even 2 steps up my porch when I spotted her waddling across my lawn in those ridiculous pink loafers she always wore. Clipboard in hand. Sunglasses too big for her face. I swear she gets off on this stuff. Mr. Steller, she called, as if she hadn't just orchestrated a botanical massacre. We had to make a judgment call regarding your non-compliant landscaping. Judgment call? I barked, pointing at the graveyard formerly known as my garden. You buried my roses. They were in violation. Section 4, paragraph C, unapproved plant installations within 3 feet of the sidewalk. The board voted. Gravel was deemed a low-maintenance alternative. You mean you voted? The board supported me unanimously. Because you're the board, Orielle. She smiled like someone who'd just microwaved fish in the office break room. You'll find a citation in your mailbox. And please don't remove the gravel, it's now part of the HOA-approved landscape. I had to walk inside before I said something that would make the situation worse. I slammed the front door, paced the hallway, then ripped open the mailbox. Sure enough, there it was, an official-looking letterhead with a $500 fine for non-standard vegetation and an itemized bill for community property improvement services. I laughed. Then I grabbed a beer and sat in my office, surrounded by law books and old case files. Before I was a paramedic, I was an assistant DA over in Mason County. And I never forgot how to burn someone with paper. By morning, I had a plan. First, I needed proof. I pulled footage from the security cameras I'd installed after Orielle tried to find me for leaving my porch light on past 11. I found exactly what I was looking for: 3 men in safety vests dumping gravel from a truck, one of whom paused to admire the roses before shrugging and burying them under stone. The truck had a logo: Evergreen Property Services. I called them. The guy on the line, a contractor named Devin, was surprisingly cooperative. Yeah, we got the order from some lady, Mrs. Abner. She said it was urgent, paid cash up front, told us to go ahead even if the homeowner wasn't present. Did she provide any documentation? Nope. Just pointed and said, "Dump it here." I got his statement in writing. Next, I dug into our HOA's bylaws. Orielle had left herself a paper trail of power grabs amendments she'd pushed through without community vote, fines issued without hearings, and in this case, landscaping alterations made without due notice, which per state statute was illegal. I drafted a cease and desist. Then I filed a claim with the county small claims court: destruction of private property, malicious conduct, and HOA overreach. But I didn't stop there. I printed copies of everything and walked door to door on Saturday morning. Most people didn't even know Orielle had unilaterally rewritten the landscaping rules last spring. I made sure they did now. By Monday, 11 homeowners had joined my complaint. Tuesday evening, I was on my porch drinking a second beer when Orielle pulled up again. This time she didn't bother with the fake smile. "You're harassing the neighborhood, Isaac." "Nope. Just informing the people you claim to represent." You're making a mistake. This will go nowhere. The HOA has legal standing. I held up a folder and tapped it. Not when the president authorizes unauthorized alteration of private property. That's criminal mischief, Orielle. And I've got it all in writing. Her lips thinned. This won't end well for you. I leaned on the porch rail, calm, patient. You're right. It'll end in court. She left in a huff. The next day, I filed a formal complaint with the city zoning board and sent a copy of the security footage to the county prosecutor's office. The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. I spent those days collecting more support. Turns out I wasn't the only one she'd targeted. She fined a nurse $300 for planting lavender, a retired vet for having a flagpole 2 inches too tall, and even threatened a teenager over a skateboard ramp. The neighborhood was fed up. Come hearing day, the courtroom was packed. Orielle walked in wearing a navy pantsuit 2 sizes too tight, and that same smug confidence she always wore like armor. She barely glanced at me. The judge, an older man with tired eyes and zero patience, asked her to explain the gravel incident. She launched into a lecture about community aesthetics, consistency, and her interpretation of the HOA guidelines. I waited until she finished. Then I stood and handed the judge a folder. Inside, contractor testimony, security footage screenshots, the original bylaws and her illegal amendments, and a petition signed by 29 homeowners demanding her resignation. The judge flipped through it, glanced at Orielle, and said, "Did you obtain written consent from Mr. Steller before altering his property?" I didn't need to. His roses were in violation. That's not what I asked.
No.
Then you committed criminal trespass and destruction of private property. I'm forwarding this case to the district attorney for review. Orielle's face finally cracked. I turned to her as we left the room. Get ready to guard. Orielle called an emergency HOA meeting 3 days after the hearing. Flyers showed up in every mailbox, printed in bold type and dramatic language, warning of a coordinated attempt to undermine the community's aesthetic integrity. That was a new one. She scheduled it for 7 in the evening at the clubhouse, the same one she'd once locked to keep residents from organizing a spring barbecue without her approval. I showed up early, not to stir trouble, but to take a front-row seat with a full binder and a thermos of black coffee. The room filled quickly. Fold-out chairs scraped across the floor as neighbors settled in, some whispering, some glaring at Orielle as she stood stiffly behind the podium. I appreciate your attendance, she began, voice pitched like she was giving a lecture to unruly children. There's been a great deal of misinformation circulating. I'd like to address the matter directly before things spiral further. I raised my hand. She ignored it. The landscaping incident at Mr. Steller's property was regrettably handled with a sense of urgency that may have exceeded procedural norms. However, it was not done maliciously. It was in the interest of community standards. I've got a question, said Malcolm, a retired firefighter who always wore denim jackets and had a voice like gravel in a blender. Who gave you the authority to spend HOA funds without a vote? Orielle hesitated. The board empowers the president with discretionary authority in matters requiring immediate action. There was an emergency, said Priya, a pharmacist who had once been fined for putting fairy lights on her front porch. The roses weren't hurting anyone. You paid cash to a contractor without documentation. That's not an abuse of power, Orielle said tightly. It's decisive leadership. Sounds like fraud, I said. Especially when you altered governing documents without quorum. That got murmurs. Orielle tried to redirect, launching into a speech about tradition and neighborhood cohesion, but the room wasn't buying it. People weren't just angry, they were embarrassed. Embarrassed they'd let this go on so long without pushing back. I propose a vote, Malcolm announced, standing. Immediate suspension of presidential authority until a full audit is conducted. You can't do that, Orielle snapped. I am the elected president. And we're the ones who elected you, said Priya. I passed around a list of the contested amendments Orielle had passed. 32 changes, none of which had been presented at a public meeting. I'd marked each one with the date it was filed and the absence of meeting minutes or vote records. I also included the name of the notary. She forged on 2 filings someone who'd moved out of state 2 years earlier. People read in silence, then passed the pages along. Orielle's face turned blotchy. She tried to collect herself, but her authority was unraveling fast. "I'll be consulting legal counsel," she said stiffly. "You might want to consult a landscaper first," I replied. "The motion to suspend your authority passed. You're on administrative leave until the audit's complete." No one objected. By the following week, the audit was underway. A local CPA, Rhonda Keener, volunteered to go through the books after discovering that she'd been charged twice for the same holiday lighting infraction. She was meticulous, thorough, and had a memory like a steel trap. Within days, she uncovered nearly $8,000 in unaccounted expenditures payments made to non-licensed contractors for vague services like aesthetic compliance and emergency property alignment. Orielle had signed off on all of them. Rhonda presented her findings at a Saturday town hall, this time held on the community green with folding tables and a portable PA system. Orielle wasn't invited. I stood under the shade of a sycamore tree as Rhonda finished her report. Her final slide was a breakdown of fines issued over the past 12 months. 93% had gone to the same 16 households, 15 of which had, at some point, challenged Orielle's decisions. "You think that's coincidence?" Rhonda asked. "Because I don't." "This is targeted harassment," said a man from the back. "She weaponized the rulebook." "Time to repeal half those rules," someone else muttered. "I'd like to make a motion," I said, stepping forward. "Full repeal of every amendment passed in the past year without a community vote. And a formal requirement that any future addendum must be ratified by at least 60% of homeowners." The motion carried unanimously. After the meeting, a few neighbors stayed behind to help me dig out the gravel from my front yard. We filled 20 heavy-duty contractor bags and stacked them at the curb. Priya brought gloves. Malcolm brought a wheelbarrow. By sunset, the soil was exposed again. "Still got the roots?" Malcolm asked. "I kept some cuttings in the garage," I said. "They'll come back." The next morning, Orielle showed up with a gardening hat and a pair of shears. She didn't say a word, just started unpacking potted plants from the back of her SUV. She'd brought garnet beauties. 6 of them. Healthy, mature, and already trellised. "County mediation order," she said flatly, not quite meeting my eyes. "I was told to restore everything I damaged." "Personally." "You missed a spot," I said, pointing to the corner where the sprinkler line had been cracked by the gravel truck. She nodded and went back to work. For the next 3 hours, Orielle planted roses under my supervision. I didn't gloat. I didn't mock her. I just handed her tools and made sure she didn't skip the fertilizer. Neighbors stopped to watch. Some waved. Others took pictures. "I used to think she was just strict," Priya told me later. "But she's been running this place like a little kingdom." "Not anymore," I said. "We've got term limits now." That was another change we passed. Board members could serve only 2 years before rotating out. No more lifetime appointments. No more power hoarding. The final blow came 2 weeks later when the city prosecutor announced formal charges: falsifying documents, misappropriating funds, and unauthorized alteration of private property. Orielle tried to downplay it, but the media picked up the story. A news van parked outside her house for 2 days, and a local reporter did a segment titled "Queen of the Cul-de-sac." She moved out by the end of the month. The new HOA president, a retired teacher named Luis Mercado, held a welcome breakfast on his first day. Coffee, bagels, and a suggestion box. He didn't wear loafers. He didn't bring a clipboard. He just listened. My roses bloomed again that spring. Not quite as full as before, but strong. determined. Like the neighborhood. We'd been bruised, but not broken. And now we had roots again, deep ones. By the time Orielle's trial date was set, the neighborhood had shifted into something unrecognizable in the best way. With her gone, the air felt lighter. For the first time in years, people lingered outside past dusk, chatted across front lawns, and waved without suspicion. The iron grip that had made everyone keep their heads down and yards identical had finally loosened. I was back on shift full-time, rotating between ambulance runs and trauma calls, but I still found myself getting updates about the HOA audit like it was the neighborhood's favorite new TV drama. Luis, the new president, kept a transparent log of every board meeting and budget adjustment posted on a corkboard he mounted just outside the clubhouse. It even had a mailbox slot for anonymous suggestions. Someone had dropped in a drawing of Orielle with devil horns. It stayed up for a week before Luis replaced it with a flyer for a block-wide chili cook-off. I hadn't thought much more about the roses. They were holding on fragile, but alive. I watered them at sunrise before my runs, sometimes talking to them like they were co-workers who'd survived a bad shift. One morning, as I was adjusting the support trellis on the easternmost climber, a voice called out from the sidewalk. Didn't think they'd take root again. But here you are. I turned. It was Devin, the contractor from Evergreen Property Services, the one who dumped the gravel. You're a long way from your usual route, I said, standing. He held up a clipboard, a real one, not the paper-thin kind Orielle used to carry like a weapon. Got pulled onto a city project 2 streets over. Figured I'd stop by. Been thinking about what happened. I cocked my head. You're not in trouble, if that's what you're worried about. You gave your statement. No, I know. He shifted his weight. I should have asked more questions. Should have realized something was off when she paid cash and wouldn't sign a work order. You were doing your job. Still. I've started checking every site twice now. No more just following orders. Learned that lesson. I nodded. Accountability's a rare currency these days. You spend it well, people notice. He handed me a card. If you ever need anything fixed on the house. I took it. Appreciate that. But let's hope I don't. After he left, I tucked the card in my back pocket and turned back to the roses. One of them had sprouted a new bud. Small, tight, and deep red. Not bad. The next board meeting wasn't held in the clubhouse. Luis moved it to the middle of the park, under the shade of the pin oaks. Folding chairs again, but this time arranged in a circle. No podium. Just open air and equal footing. I sat next to Rhonda, who was eating a banana and making notes on a manila folder. Got something brewing? I asked. She wiped her fingers on a napkin. Final audit's done. You're gonna love this. I'm listening. She funneled over $15,000 into a community improvement fund that doesn't exist. Money came from citation fees. Most of it was paid in cash, never deposited into the HOA's bank account. Where'd it go? Untraceable. But I've got receipts for gravel, paint, truck rentals. All from hardware stores she visited under her own name. And get this, she tried to write off the expenses as donations. Donations to what? That, she said, snapping the folder shut, is exactly what the judge is about to find out. Luis called the meeting to order with a laugh rather than a gavel. He updated everyone on the new community garden, yes, an actual garden, funded with a portion of the recovered fines. It would be built on the vacant lot Orielle had once tried to turn into a gated picnic area only accessible by keycard. Next on the docket, Luis said, we've got a proposal from Isaac. I stood. Simple idea. I think we should create a resident oversight committee. 5 rotating volunteers, no board members. They review any proposed amendments, fines, or changes before they're implemented. No more backroom decisions. A few people clapped. And 2, I continued, I propose we restore the landscaping freedom previously restricted by Section 4, Paragraph C. Let people plant what they want as long as it doesn't cause harm or block sidewalks. Rhonda raised her hand. Seconded. The motion passed with a unanimous show of hands. I didn't speak to Orielle again until the courthouse hallway. She was wearing a beige overcoat, the same color as her old SUV. Her hair was pulled back into a tight knot, and she clutched a leather folder like it might defend her from the consequences of her choices. I didn't approach her. I just leaned against the wall across from the courtroom door and waited for the bailiff to call us in. "You think you've won something," she said finally. "I think I've helped stop something. You embarrassed me. Publicly. You did that yourself." Her lips tightened. "They're sheep. All of them. They need structure. Rules. They needed fairness. And dignity." She studied me for a moment. "You're no better than I am. You just play it safer." I pushed off the wall. "No. I just didn't use power to punish people." When the trial began, the prosecution laid out everything: unauthorized spending, forged signatures, failure to obtain consent for property alterations. Her defense tried to argue that she acted in the neighborhood's best interest, but the paper trail told a different story. So did the testimonies from residents, each describing a different method of intimidation or manipulation. When Rhonda took the stand, she didn't flinch. She used fear, Rhonda told the court. Fear of fines. Fear of retaliation. Fear of being the next target. That's not leadership. That's coercion. Orielle was sentenced to community service, ordered to repay a portion of the misused funds, and barred from holding any HOA position in the state for 5 years. It wasn't a prison sentence, but it was a public reckoning. After the verdict, the neighborhood threw a potluck, not to celebrate her downfall, but to mark the beginning of something new. Malcolm grilled ribs. Priya brought samosas. Someone set up a projector and played old home movies from when the subdivision first opened back, when everything was still hopeful. I stood by the food table, sipping lemonade, when Luis walked over. "You ever think about running for president?" I laughed. "Nope. I already work enough overtime." "All right, but if the Roses ever need a campaign manager, they've got deep roots. They'll manage." As the sun dipped below the rooftops, the roses in my yard glowed like embers. A few kids were chasing each other through the grass, their parents watching without worry. No one was measuring grass height. No one was taking photos of porch decorations. Turns out, when you pull up the gravel, good things can grow. The roses held on better than I expected through the early summer stretch, blooms deepening to a richer red, leaves thickening, stalks stretching toward the morning light like they had something to prove. I'd built a new trellis, this one out of reclaimed iron fencing from an old railway depot a few towns over. It was heavier than anything store-bought, but solid, like it belonged there. That was the point. By mid-June, the Oversight Committee had already proposed a dozen new reforms, each more practical than the last. Gone were the obscure fines and impossible-to-follow landscaping maps, replaced by a one-page guide that fit on a fridge magnet. Clear boundaries. No gray areas. Rhonda laminated copies and handed them out during the community garage sale. The sale itself had been Luis's idea. He'd made flyers with cartoons of smiling neighbors trading junk, and the turnout was better than anyone predicted. I helped Malcolm set up folding tables along the east curb, mostly to get him to stop lifting boxes with his bad shoulder. He grunted every time he bent, but refused to admit it. "You see that?" he said, nodding toward the Simmons driveway. "That's 3 years' worth of unopened board games she bought to keep her grandkids off video games. They never opened a single one. Reckon they'll sell?" "Already did. Some guy from 2 blocks over scooped the whole stack. I'm just happy no one's threatened to shut us down for traffic congestion." He chuckled. "Funny how normal feels like a revolution around here." I glanced down the line of tables, kids running between them holding up old toys and parents chatting like they hadn't been strangers just a few months ago.
Feels earned, I said.
Later that afternoon, I ducked into the community center, now repurposed into a shared workspace for residents. Someone had repainted the walls with murals, bright, abstract shapes that wrapped around the corners like blooming vines. At the back, Rhonda sat hunched over a stack of manila folders, sorting through what looked like a decade's worth of neglected documentation. I dropped a brown paper bag on the table between us.
Sandwich, I said.
She looked up, eyebrows raised. Tuna? Close. Chicken salad. No raisins. Bless you. She took a bite, chewed, and pushed a folder toward me. This is what I found buried in the back of the filing cabinet, she said, mouth still half full. 12 years ago, the HOA signed a maintenance agreement with a landscaping company that went bust 5 years later. But the payments kept being made monthly.
Wait.
To a defunct company.
Yup.
Paper checks. No digital trail. Cashed consistently. All signed by different treasurers over the years. But always approved by the president, whoever it was at the time. I flipped through the statements. That's a lot of missed oversight. Or deliberate evasion. Either way, we're talking nearly $40,000 over a decade. You think Orielle knew? She had to. She extended the contract 2 years ago, even after the company dissolved. Think we can recover any of it? Maybe. But that depends on what Luis wants to do with the information. I looked up just as Luis walked in, holding 2 coffees and a clipboard under one arm. You're both looking way too serious, he said. Rhonda raised the folder. We've got a ghost contractor.
Luis blinked. I
don't even want to know what that means. I explained, and by the time I finished, he'd set the coffees down and started flipping through the folder himself. Here I was thinking we'd finally sorted through the worst of it, he muttered. You want to file a claim? I asked. Luis leaned back in the chair, exhaled. Honestly?
I want to.
But this neighborhood's just now starting to breathe again, dragging everyone into another legal mess. It might backfire. Rhonda pushed her chair back. Then don't make it public.
Not yet.
Start by contacting the bank. Find out where those checks were deposited.
Luis nodded slowly.
Okay. Quiet approach first. If it leads somewhere actionable, I'll take it to the board. As we left the community center, the sun dipped low behind the rooftops, casting long shadows across the pavement. The neighborhood didn't feel fragile anymore. It felt awake. 2 weeks later, I was working a late shift when I got a call from Luis. He rarely called, so I stepped outside the ER bay and answered. We traced the checks, he said. Turns out the account they were deposited into was opened under a fake LLC. But the address linked to it belongs to Orielle's brother. Lives upstate. Think she was funneling money through him? That's what it looks like. The account was closed 6 months ago, but we've got enough documentation to refer it to the County Fraud Division. You going to?
Luis hesitated.
I wanted your opinion first. Why me? Because you know what it's like to push back and still sleep at night. I thought about it. About the gravel. About the roses. About the way she'd stood in court, still convinced she'd done nothing wrong.
She made choices, I said.
We all live with ours. Then I'll file the report in the morning. It didn't become public knowledge right away. Luis kept it quiet like we agreed. But things have a way of surfacing. By late August, word got out that Orielle was under a second investigation. This time for financial misconduct. No one seemed surprised. At the next board meeting, held under the stars with string lights and coffee thermoses, Luis addressed it directly. We're not here to settle personal scores, he said. But we are here to protect the integrity of our community. If someone stole from us, they should be held accountable.
Quietly.
Legally. There was no applause. Just nods. Agreement without spectacle. That felt like progress. That fall, We held the first community planting day. Not just roses, but everything: sunflowers, dogwoods, native grasses. Each household got a voucher to pick up plants from a local nursery.
No restrictions.
No approval forms. Just a shared goal to make things grow again. I planted 3 new rose varieties along the fence: Queen Elizabeth, Veterans Honor, and a wild climbing yellow I found at a roadside stand. I didn't name them.
Didn't need to.
They weren't symbols anymore. Just flowers. Beautiful, persistent, and entirely mine. During the planting, a boy from down the block wandered over. Maybe 8 years old. He watched me work for a while, then pointed to the trellis. Did those used to be dead? Yeah, I said. Why didn't you give up on them? Because they weren't finished yet. He nodded like that made sense, then ran off to help his mom dig a hole for a sapling. Later that night, I stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching the wind shift through the petals. They swayed gently, unbothered by the past. Everything had changed. Not just the rules. Not just the leadership. The people had changed. They spoke up now, helped each other, looked out for things before they got out of hand. We didn't need a tyrant in beige shoes to tell us how to live. We just needed space to grow and a little light. The roses bloomed deeper that year, and not one petal touched gravel again.